A clear message there from the head of NATO. Battle tanks will help Ukraine win the war. Multiple reports say Germany has made a decision and will not only send tanks into Ukraine, it is also ready to allow other countries to donate their German-made tanks as well. Kiev has been pleading with Berlin for this kind of help for quite some time now. NATO allies have largely supported Ukraine's push. Here to dig into this development is Peter MacKay. He served as Minister of National Defence under Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Mr. MacKay is now a strategic advisor at Deloitte Canada. Mr. MacKay, thank you so much for speaking with us. If these reports are accurate, and it's not necessarily just Germany right now, we're also seeing reports out of the United States that they are also considering are closer to making a decision, closer to a yes on sending their tanks into Ukraine as well. How significant is all of this?
Well, I think it's fairly significant, Katie. The countries, as you know, mostly NATO countries, have been pressuring Germany, an organization of which they are a part. There's about 15 countries in NATO that possess these Leopard 2 tanks or different variants. And the Germans themselves, of course, in manufacturing these tanks. I wouldn't call this a game changer, but it will save a lot of lives, just as it saved lives for Canadians in Afghanistan when we purchased them going back to 2007. And we had a deal with the Netherlands to buy their used tanks, but they were in very good shape. They had essentially been brand new and warehoused. And so I think there's certainly from the president's perspective, President Zelensky, he's looking forward to getting these tanks into theater of operations, as well as from other countries like Poland and Germany and the Netherlands. This would certainly protect more Ukrainian lives and allow them to push the Russians back.
Berlin has been sitting on the fence for weeks. Why do you think Germany is now comfortable saying, yes, okay, we'll send our tanks and we're comfortable with everyone else sending their German-made tanks if the announcement tomorrow, as it is expected, is that just that? Why now?
There's a few things at play, Katie. I think they wanted to build greater support amongst their own domestic population as well as throughout Europe and here in North America. There's also a bit of a stigma attached to German armor. And, President Scholz is not, he's not immune to his own history. The last time tanks like this rolled across a Polish border or rolled into other parts of Europe, it was during the Second World War. So there's a stigma and a bit of a resistance, I think, in some circles. And let's not forget, this is a coalition government where they have to get consensus within their own rank and file. So that political imperative, I think, has now been passed. I think the president is now comfortable and prepared to give what is essentially a green light over the, it's basically a type of legal obligation that countries sign when they take delivery of these tanks.
It's not just Germany. As I mentioned, U.S. defense officials appear closer to a yes to sending their M1 Abrams tanks. Now, previously, U.S. defense officials said it wouldn't be very practical. They have jet engines, they're expensive and hard to repair, and they require a lot of training. There are multiple reports out of the United States suggesting that Joe Biden is close to a yes, and that kind of decision could come soon. What do you make of the U.S. moving toward a yes on that? Is that significant?
Well, you'll recall that initially this was one of the conditions, if you will, that the Germans were looking for, that the Americans send their own Abrams tanks. They're talking in terms of numbers about 14, which is a company, and they're different. They're not the same as the Leopard tanks. They wouldn't be interoperable. They don't have the same gun, the same type of up armor that these Leopard 2s have to resist armor-piercing missiles from the Russians. But they're still very good tanks. And the Ukrainians, to use that well-worn expression, won't be beggars. They'll take anything they can get. I note that Netherlands has also now been talking about sending F-16 fighter aircraft. Canada, of course, has joined a number of countries in sending surface-to-air missiles, which are needed. We seem to be on a slow march towards some sort of closing of airspace and protecting Ukrainian citizens. So there has been movement. There continues to be progress made on a number of these equipment transfers. And quite frankly, this is another victory for Ukrainians and for President Zelensky in their effort to push the Russians out of their country in this illegal invasion.
So the big question next for you is, what should Canada be doing? Should Canada be sending some of its Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine?
The short answer is yes. We have roughly 80 that are operational now. We purchased around 100 when we were in Afghanistan. These are Cold War equipment, but very, very good. We used up some of them in Afghanistan. They were extremely effective in protecting troops and sending a message at that time to the Taliban that we were not going to concede Kandahar province. So yes, I think you're going to see Canada probably send a company of 14 tanks as well. The Canadian Army, of course, are very interested in retaining that type of armor, in addition to surface-to-air type of equipment that we have gone ahead and sent to Ukraine. So all of this plays into the larger question for Minister Anand about the rearmament of the Canadian Army and the Canadian forces more broadly. As we diminish our own equipment, we have to look to replacing that in the future. And those are big ticket items.
If the Liberal government does agree, does think, okay, yes, we have some tanks that are going to be useful to Ukraine. I know that no one's going to want to get ahead of Germany on the announcement. No one's going to want to get ahead of the United States on the announcement, and that could come as early as tomorrow. But how quickly would you want to see the Liberal government act if it is going to contribute these tanks?
Oh, I think this has been talked about now for almost the entire duration of the war. We have a lot of these tanks in New Brunswick, as well as in Suffield, Alberta, CFB Suffield. It also is worth mentioning that during that same time period, we bought heavy lift equipment, C-17s and C-130 aircraft that can transport them. So we won't have to rely on anybody else. And frankly, Katie, we can roll those tanks onto the back of those heavy lift aircraft and have them, right in after the Germans and Poland if the request is there.
So from your experience, if Canada gets to a yes, how quickly do you think that could fold out?
Well,
Like,
I
is
think
it
it could
days? Is it
happen.
weeks? Like, how long does it take?
It all depends on how quickly the government and the Department of National Defense want to move. I would say it could be done in days, because this discussion, as I said, has been going on for a very long time. And those tanks are well oiled and primed and ready to go. And if we're sending 14, that's several plane loads. We're going to have to make a number of trips. So certainly within a couple of weeks, we could have those Leopard 2 tanks into a theater and saving lives in Ukraine.
Really quickly, are you concerned about how Russia will retaliate if these tanks do start moving into Ukraine?
Well, I mean, this has been the argument for a very long time, Katie. The discussion that the West, NATO, is taking part in a proxy war. Let's make no mistake about it. The Russians are entirely in the wrong. They are the villains here. They crossed an international border. They've broken all kinds of international law in doing so. And so we, the collective in the West, have to do everything within our power to ensure that Ukraine wins. And for the time being, that means giving them the best equipment as timely as we can to wage war and to recapture the territory that has been illegally, unlawfully annexed by the Russians. So I believe that this is a just cause. It's a very expensive endeavor, to be sure, but if we're not fighting them via the Ukraines, we, the West and NATO, can be drawn in any event, and that's a scary prospect, to be sure. But the Russians have been saber rattling on that storyline and narrative for a long time.
All right, former Minister of National Defense Peter MacKay, thank you.
My pleasure, Katie. Thank you.